Matt O'Hearn, grain merchandiser for Scoular Grain, looks at the 2024-2025 organic markets.
Lane Scab, Kate Hogemeyer, which most of you are familiar with, Madeline Crowdy, Dustin Plager, and Grace Huffling is on our team. In addition to that, we've got three accountants that will settle our AR and AP. So we've got a team of 9 of us there. The office itself is around 200 people, primarily in conventional grain and feedstuffs for the most part. And feel free to jump in if anybody's got a question, comment on any of this. Most of the information you'll see is from Argus Media, which is previously Mercaris. I enjoy some of the stats that they put out there. And some of the information is kind of tough to come by. You know, the USDA will have a set of reporting, and then they'll do some private price reporting as well. So there's a couple services like them out there. For starters here, looking at the organic demand portfolio, most of you are familiar with, and I've heard several talk about poultry demand, being broilers or egg layers, also the dairy sector. A couple notable things that I put that you can see here on the screen. I think it's, you look at the dairy demand over the last 2017 through 2021, pretty flat, and we've all felt it and seen it in terms of milk production for the last 2 years. What feels good about the current cycle we're in, we've had a 6% year-on-year growth on the milk sector, so that is at least promising that there's maybe some demand rebuilding from here. The other one I'd point out too is that it's a small number, but poultry in total is a 1% gain year-on-year, which is small, but in relation to how many different events of avian influenza we've had through the U.S., I think that's a net positive that there's still a baseline of demand and it's growing. And we'll talk later through this, but the demand certainly needs to pick up the pace because our production has certainly outpaced demand over time. So that's the kind of the makeup of the organic feed demand side of things. Specifically organic corn. This is a Mercaris report just showing price as it relates to supply, U.S. production being the dark shaded columns there. A couple of things. So this was 22-23 Mercaris prediction of where they thought corn would be going, and then the dark or the filled in line is where we are, which is what they're calling $6.50 U.S. Corn Belt price bid side. The other thing that I think is of note, you look at beginning stocks where we've been kind of building that 4 to 5 million bushel worth of carry out, beginning or ending stocks, they look at it. And that feels what we're experiencing in the marketplace today. We started building those stocks when price rallied pretty aggressively, and since then prices came down with ample supply. Diving into the details here, so this top left is the top 10 states of organic corn production in the U.S., which you'd come to expect those states would be at the top of the list. For 24-25 crop year, the one we just went through, in total corn production was up 8%. That came from 5% of acreage, harvested acres increase, and also a 2% yield increase. The asterisk there is this year was a little bit different. You can see it on the bottom right chart, that 20,000 acres year-on-year change. Seems big, but can be explained with the OID now publishing acres on certificates, so that Mercaris data team thinks that it was just because of those extra acres add that it wasn't actual new acres, it was just acres that weren't being reported previously. But still, kind of the same feel to the marketplace. We continue to grow production, and demand is only increasing in small percentage points, either dairy or poultry each year. So you guys are doing a great job growing corn. Looking at some of the import math here, it's interesting. So in the bottom there, you can see the light green is Turkey origin. And then the other ones to note would be yellow would be Canada, and the dark green at the bottom is Argentina. And seeing those changes over time, and especially the years that those have happened. So in 23, 24, 7% decrease in imported corn total volumes. and projecting a 25% decrease this year in imported corn. In total, the U.S. will use about 20% of the demand used in the U.S. is imports, 80% is domestic production. So not a huge change, but you think about it relative to price. If we've got a 650 bushel in Nebraska, you're going to limit some of the amounts of imports that come in, apart from just logistical advantages at direct port California or direct port East Coast. And we'll talk a little bit about it, and more so in soybeans. It's a more heavily imported crop, but what Canada means for potential tariffs coming down. This graph here just kind of showcases in the background layers there is the supply, and in the foreground, the blue bars, is demand. And you can see we're growing more than we're demanding, kind of in a basic sense. Feed use versus food use is also a little bit interesting. We have seen some food grain demand increase over time, small but still growth. And the feed has been relatively flat apart from 25 and 26 projections. There has been some kind of informal announcements on some broilers growing out production, and hopefully we can stave off avian influenza with some of that growth. Takeaways for organic corn: ample domestic supply with an increase in production this year. Imports are expected to fall 25%. You think about marketplaces in cyclical moves. 650 corn is going to make less imports. Price over time should rise. Imports are going to find a destination in the U.S. So this is, part of that feels like a low cycle right now. We could certainly use some demand support from that standpoint. Expecting another 24-25 marketing year, 4 million bushel carried out, which is relatively flat for the last couple of years, which means there's ample supply, so it would put a bearish tone to the marketplace. However, if we can keep up demand, we ought to have some friends in the corn market. Organic soybeans. A similar chart here. This is Mercaris data 22-23, trying to project out where bean prices would be today, calling it $19.50, $19.50 bid in the Midwest for the most part. Similar to corn, you can see that we've built beginning stocks year on year the last couple of years in response to those high price environments. We imported a lot and built those stocks up. We'll get to another one here. Top 10 organic soybean production by state. I think so in total for the soybean market, production was actually down 7%, mostly from harvested acres. Yield was actually up 2%. So harvested acres was kind of the driver down for a less production this year. If you look at Nebraska, I think it's kind of interesting. Definitely the outlier on the states here. A 54% increase in production this year versus last year. Obviously, last year or 2 years ago was drier, so that accounts for some of it. But I think of what that potentially means for this next cycle of 25 crop corn acres can certainly have some of this bean rotation into it potentially. Soybean imports, this is interesting from, as mentioned, 70% of the beans or bean complex. So when we'll talk about bushels of beans, it'll be converted to meal too, because meal is actually what the market imports more of. But we import about 70%, the U.S. imports about 70% of the beans that we consume in the U.S. So you look here, the chart country of origin. The red vertical lines are just some events that have happened or prospective happening. The first one there, you can see in 2020, 2021, we were importing about 16.8 million bushels from India. 2021 had a 224% import tariff on India, and we took that 16.8 import down to 4.5 import from India. And simultaneously, green bar gets smaller, but those dark blue and light blue starts to increase. That's That's the imports from Africa and Canada. So Canada has maintained the last couple of years around 4 million bushels of imports. Africa has really blown the roof off of it in the sense that now, as of last year, 10.8 million bushels worth of import, mostly meal. You think about that in relation to I'll go back to total size of the U.S. crop last year was 10.5 million bushels. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so are there any tariffs on the grains now, or is Trump going to put some on, or what's the deal?
Well, I think we'll find out in a couple weeks. So no, there is still tariffs imposed on India, and that's what's kind of shrunk that all the way down to zero. The one caveat there is that, in the same reason, we went from 16.8 to 4.5 after tariffs were imposed in India. Not all Indian companies had tariffs if they complied with NOP regulation. So there's a handful of potentially good players that had all their documentation that are not having to get the 224% tariff. So when I think about potential of Trump tariffs for Canada or Canada, really, there could be, there might not be a significant impact. It might just change country of origin, or something else is going to pop up. And I think of the sleeper being someone like Argentina or Brazil. Whenever, if you look at this chart and you see that 25 million total bushels, we've been pretty close to that line. We've got a lot of country of origin volatility, but it's the market's way of finding a source when something else gets shut down, assuming price is there to support it, which we can talk a little bit about. But speculation would be the price at 1950, the price does not support significant imports.
So why has Africa stepped up so much, and we're getting so much from them?
That's a separate variable in the marketplace, and that the NOP just announced that some further investigation into certifying agencies in Africa, because the marketplace, similarly, it's a head scratcher. How did we all of a sudden get 10.8 million bushels of African soybean meal and beans? So there's kind of two separate factors. You got the Canadian import factor that could impact 4 million bushels of Canadian beans, and then you've got the NOP investigation into Africa that could affect 10 million bushels of beans. In total, 14 million bushels, which would be 50% of the organic beans that we're importing today. So it could have significant impact in total. And here's a little bit around that, calling it 1940, 1950 dollars per bushel for beans in the Midwest. Been pretty flat. I think the positive thing, and running back to kind of that line chart here, seeing the ability for us the marketplace to find the floor, it feels promising that we have found that, and the cyclical nature of the market should give us some positive momentum for higher prices in the future. How quick that may happen might be a slow mover, just because we've still got some carry out. The market has carry out to work through first. And then you throw in the variables of Canadian import or African investigation that could accelerate that. So Mercaris's projection, which I think is a little lofty, but on an extreme side of things, all those things come to fruition. They would anticipate a $9 per bushel rally. I don't think that's likely. Certainly there's going to be some impacts, but the market's found a way. If something happens in one geography, it's going to come from another area. That might take time, and it could make the trade very choppy. But certainly there's a more bullish factor for beans than there are bearish today. Similar chart here on beans. Background layers, gray and black, are supply side, and the foreground, light blue, is demand. Seeing food at the top, it's a relatively small player, and it'll continue to stay small. Much different factors go into soybean food side of things, demand cycles and things like that in the CPG companies. On the feed side, all relative to how do we crush a bean and turn it into feed for dairy and poultry consumption. And there's the ending stocks that we talked about. We're still forecasting more supply of ending stocks for soybeans, so that would have some downward pressure, at least keep things flat on prices until we work through those. Organic soybean takeaways here. 4.5 million bushels of carryout. Long supply. It's going to take time to work through that until we get to another production cycle. And similar to corn, the market needs demand. We need more growth out of those heavy demand cycles of poultry and dairy to keep things going. Organic wheat. We'll talk a little bit about this. The organic wheat market, much different than both corn and beans. 26.1 million bushels in 24-25 marketing year. That's inclusive of all wheat classes, hard red winter, hard red spring, soft red winter, durum, etc. In a lot of different geographies too, and for growth. Favorable growing conditions led to a 1.5% increase in yield this past year, resulting in a record 17.2 million bushels of organic hard red winter. In the face of that, wheats behaved a little differently. Corn and beans were very quick to retrace in terms of price. Wheat was much slower in that sense, so it's projecting us to have a lot more imports this coming year as that price continues to fall. Prices expected to remain relatively low. Looking forward here, we've got another crop upon us that's looking sizable in terms of prospective acres that are out there already, and some favorable weather conditions in some parts. The wheat market, there's a feed which you all have probably seen relative to the price of corn. Wheat will price into a corn ration at some type of discount to that, or milling grade wheat market will have several different variables in terms of you're looking for test weight and protein level and damage that can hit a flour demand. In each region can have a different class of wheat that's going to have a different class of protein and therefore carry a different value. So if the market grows a lot of high protein HRW, there might be a premium for low protein, which doesn't happen all that much, but there's a lot of moving parts in the flour side of the wheat market. And that was it.
Do you have any price projections with wheat? Like what do we got right now?
So feed wheat, so it'd have to, if it didn't make number one or number two, vomitoxin was issued this year, so that would kick it into the feed wheat market. So nearby feed wheat in eastern Nebraska is going to be somewhere around $6 a bushel, whereas a 11 protein or higher milling quality bushel would probably be somewhere around $7.50. North of 12 protein could be somewhere around $8.50. Just as kind of a barometer for where we are right now. Looking forward to next crop year, it's pretty illiquid. A lot of the milling demand and flour sales won't really happen until a crop happens. So that way we can see, hey, what is the average protein of a crop? What do they need to fill in those gaps to hit that particular flour demand? So sometimes wheat can be pretty illiquid until right at harvest, and we collect all the information of what's out there.
What's the feasibility of Nebraskans here selling food grade soybeans?
So Scoular has a part of our sister group. We've got a cleaning facility in Andres, Illinois, that will clean organic beans and dehull them for soy milk markets, as well as clean them for tofu markets. Those destination tofu markets are on each coast. The soy milk markets are kind of scattered within the U.S. I would say it's certainly feasible. I would relate it to the transportation of getting to a cleaning market, because all that food grade bean would need to get cleaned and aspirated and packaged to be able to hit one of those final destinations. So if you're within proximity of a facility that can handle that, I think it's certainly feasible.
But right now it's Illinois
Yeah,
for your company.
for us, yeah. There's a handful. One that comes to mind in Carroll, Iowa, I believe, that's doing a similar business.
Talk
about the protein requirement on soybeans this year?
Yeah, that's been a new thing in the last year or two. The market demanding, so you think back to, I'm going to go to the soybean import slide here. So the question on Randy on African origin and India too. So you think about the stress put on the bean in the growth of those beans in those environments in Africa and India, and the variety that they're harvesting. Historically, Indian meal is going to carry a 48 or 49% protein. Similar to a lot of the African origin, it's carrying a 48 to 49% protein. A lot of the demand, poultry and so on, got used to pricing that protein when they were buying imports. US bean or feed bean typically is going to be around 35 to 36%, but right on the edge, and that's going to kick out a meal unless you dehull the bean. There's a lot of variables that's going to change the contents of the protein of the meal. But essentially what it boils down to is the meal that we're producing domestically on a US bean is a lower protein than Indian or African imports. So recently what the market's been trying to do is price in a minimum protein on beans at 36%, and the higher the better when it comes to what they're looking for, to try to replicate what they had been buying from imports. And I think you can gain 1 or 2% if you dehull the bean first before it turned into meal. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so what is that? Is that a clear island that they're growing out there or in India, or what kind of bean is that that's got such a high protein?
I can't answer that. I don't know if I've ever seen what variety they're growing, but the meal itself has been 48 to 49%, pretty regular.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah, on the meal.
So why isn't the bean testing that high? What are the beans, if the meal's only testing that high, what are the beans testing?
Well, I don't know bean protein I would assume it'd have to be higher, just the relationship from the bean to the meal like we experience. But I would assume it had to be something like a Clear Highland 41% protein or something.
So, question here. So the farmer grew 40+% protein, you got it into your mill there, you said, oh, these are really high protein content. Would we get a premium for that?
I'd love to say that. We're similar to how wheat will trade. Wheat will trade on protein levels. I would think with the market starting to demand some protein requirements, naturally that's what it should go to. It may take time to get there if it's viable, but I don't see any reason if it's this important to feed math, which it is for protein levels. I wouldn't see any reason why it shouldn't get there if that's a big point in the market.
So you've got a past track record of what percent of the beans are over that level and what are under?
We hadn't been testing protein on beans regularly up until last probably year. And the meal, organic soybean meal that we'll kick out, we usually get tested very regularly. So we have a track record on that. And yeah, there's a lot of 44% meal that we'll kick out at our crush facilities. So that would imply maybe a 34 to 35% bean.
This might be boring to everybody else, so if it is, I'll take a side conversation. But could you just give me a tariffs 101, and especially how these proposed tariffs for imports from Canada and Mexico might affect our organic operations, and then drill on down to our food prices?
Sure. Yeah, so 4 million bushels today is if we impose tariffs January 20th, 20% of that 4 million bushels would have tariffs on it. So you take 20% of $20 beans, and that should be the 1-for-1 increase in that geography. Where the Canadian beans are grown is Ontario. What markets they serve is the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic for demand. So it might not be a direct impact for Nebraska right away, but it certainly could affect, I'd say, wheat too. We'll import wheat from Canada. A good chunk of like hard red spring will make its way down into Utah and Idaho mills, flour mills. That would have a direct impact on wheat out of Nebraska going to milling markets. So yeah, right away, 4 million bushels would be a risk for Canadian imports if a tariff was imposed.
What about Mexico? What's the thing? That's more fruits and vegetables, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. In beverage, there's a lot of beverages, and then some relationships with crossing border for car parts and things like that. It might have an interesting impact on maybe the organic side of tortilla making. So the food grade corn marketplace, a decent amount of food grade corn will originate in Nebraska and go to tortilla makers. That might change some of that dynamic, but I'm not all that well up to speed on that piece of it.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any other questions?
And I'll leave some contact cards for Kate and myself here if anybody has any further questions or wants to talk grain.
Okay, thank you.
Funding for this video was provided by the Transition to Organic Partnership Program and produced by Organic Crop Improvement Association, OCIA, Nebraska chapter members.